I would like to introduce today's speaker, Amrita Shah ma'am. She has written a book on Vikram Sarabhai, A Life, which is published by Penguin. She has co-authored Balancing India's Human Resources, Report for the Economist Intelligent Unit, 1995. And she has written a chapter in the book, The New Companion to the City, edited by the Gary Bridge and Sophie Watson, which was published by Blackwell Publication. And her book has planned to be published soon, A Contemporary History of Ahmedabad. She has, after completing her education in English literature in Mumbai, she has worked as contributing editor and columnist in the Indian Express, editor Ille, consulting editor for startups, Verve, Art India, Soul Curry, Stringer for Time Life News Service, executive editor Debonair, correspondent imprint besides being a freelance writer for Asia Week, AFP, Illustrated Weekly of India, Times of India, Indian Post, Business Plus, and Channel 4. She has secured number of fellowships such as KK Birla Fellowship for Journalism 1993-94, Visiting Fellow Henry L. Stimson Center, Washington, Fellow New India Foundation, Visiting Scholar Center for Contemporary Studies, Indian Studies of Science, Bangalore. And she has secured number of fellowships more. I think this is enough to introduce her, and rest of introduction will be, we can get through her presentation. I request all the dignitaries to release the current issue of the Parivertanacha Vatsaru.
This series has been planned, as we have been talking about it for the last 2 days, with a perspective that we should be in some way or the other able to make some sense of something called as urbanization, which is happening rapidly all around us, both in India as well as outside India, all over the world. And what one makes of what exactly is the urban, how does it function, how does it work, what are issues related and concerned with it, is what we are trying to in some way or the other reasonably address as far as this lecture series is concerned. Now, one of the most important things as far as the urban is concerned is something called as the media. The word obviously conjures a lot of images in our mind, and most of them are at times completely at variance with each other, are at times completely contradictory to each other. Media means quite a large number of things. Depending on who we are talking to and who is talking to us, the word would automatically acquire a large number of meanings. But one big media spectacle that we had recently is this recently concluded elections for the 16th Lok Sabha. And I don't know, the jury is out on that one in terms of how should one focus on the media's role in all of it. But one thing for sure, had it not been for the media, I don't want to sound political, but a number of things would possibly not have had happened. The way in which this election was not just about India that aspires for growth, for development, for a good life, for being a strong country, and a range of other things. This election was also about something much, much different. Till we didn't come to this point of 2014, the general idea was the media is supposed to convey a message. In the elections of 2014, the media turned the message itself. So there was hardly any discernment between media and message. The medium had turned into a message. And whatever was presented to you was like something that was supposed to be accepted as uncritically as is possible, as normally they do as far as a range of things that happen in the electronic media is concerned. And no better a person than Amrita Shah to explain that to us, for a simple reason, because she had an absolutely wonderful article, right, bang, during the campaign itself in the Indian Express, which talked about the fact that please try to understand as to what is exactly happening to both the media and to us as consumers of the media. So there has been a change as far as both these things are concerned. That was exactly the time when we were thinking in terms of what exactly should be done as far as this lecture series is concerned, who all should be the people who should be invited for it. And we said, no, we need to get her to talk to us about this, as to how does the urban become a site of a politics which is deeply mediated by something called as the media. So the urban as a site of mediatized politics, we felt there's hardly anyone better than her as of now to sort of flag out a number of issues for us. And that's exactly why We have called in. We are so thankful to her for having accepted our invitation and come down to Pune for this. And we would very soon realize we made actually the best choice possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this warm introduction, and thank you so much for inviting me, Vatsaru, and the Unique Academy. It's a privilege. But I'm also thrilled to be able to speak on this subject, which, as you say, is so very, very relevant and extremely close to my heart. And of course, the event that it relates to is the sort of event that we have just seen, the recent elections, with a stunning majority in a country that has so far been constitutionally secular and socialist. We have seen the Aam Aadmi Party, a party that is less than 2 years old, being perceived as a challenger after its surprising performance in the Delhi state polls. I mean, all these are firsts, complete firsts, and as you very rightly pointed out, something has been happening that is not clearly understood. There seems to be a feeling that the old formulations of caste, of anti-incumbency, of religion or regional affiliation, none of these seem adequate, an adequate enough explanation. And the media seems to offer this kind of hint at something that went, well, I won't say wrong, but something that went differently from the script that we are used to seeing in previous elections. And I think we need to understand it. Some things have appeared already. Some part of the discussion that has talked about huge sums being spent on marketing, a corporate takeover of the media. All these are kind of probably facts, but I believe that these sort of direct correlations do not actually work. And I think that to understand what has happened, one needs to look at a more kind of complex explanation. And I'm very, very grateful that you're giving me this opportunity to look at a more complex way in which sort of multiple things have happened, not right now, but over time. These are a few thoughts that I've put together with some amount of looking at other scholars. They're still preliminary, but I think that I have some sort of feel for a phenomenon. I would like to, hear what you say in reaction to some of the things I'm going to put together today. I'm going to talk about the media and politics. The element of the urban in the title is an essential part of my argument, but I will interpret it as applying to people and attitudes. I will look at it as aspirations towards a westernized modernity and towards economic advancement, which kind of underlie the urban dream. But I won't be looking at the urban as a geographical unit so much. Okay, I'd like to briefly go back a bit in time to 1983 when I became a journalist, with very idealistic notions, I might add. Like all young journalists, I thought of contributing to the democratic process. It was a really exciting time for the Indian print media. And I'm talking about the English language mainstream media, which is something I know about. I suspect the same thing was happening in the vernacular media, but perhaps a few years before or after, because this was the post-emergency time. And it was like there was a kind of unshackling, a loosening of restrictions, the censors' sort of heavy hand and the shameful way in which the media had capitulated. Suddenly that was gone, and there seemed to be this sort of blossoming. New magazines, new newspapers, investigative journalism, stories that journalists sort of took out of their normal kind of safe role of sitting and doing the kind of street reporting, but going out and stories like Kamla, where a journalist went and actually explored the market in selling women by actually making a purchase. Unthought of things. The Kuo oil deal, for instance, Arun Shoury's story, which unseated a chief minister. Women were coming into the newsroom for the first time in large numbers. You had new issues like women's issues, the environment. Courts were taking up some of the stories that were being done. Civil libertarian organizations were taking up the issues that were being done. It was one felt there was sort of a possibility of great change through journalism. even television, which so far had been under state control, was kind of slowly beginning to open up, and you had video magazines for the first time bringing to kind of an audiovisual medium stories that you never ever saw on television. So as I said, it was a time of great excitement and promise. But now I'm going to look at the same moment from another point of view, from the point of view of a scholar of the media. Robin Jeffrey, who has written extensively on the Indian media industry, identifies 3 periods in information transmission in India. The one is the hand-to-hand and face-to-face of pre-industrial times. The second is the era of genteel print from the 1870s to the 1980s. And the third is the mass print and television from the 1980s. Now, Jeffrey sees a continuum between these stages. What he says is that economic change leading to pervasive capitalism is the necessary precursor to each period. When capitalism strengthens, the media technology necessary to carry consumption to new groups is invented or acquired. So if I judge by this interpretation, then what seemed to me, young and naive as I was, a time of great promise and possibility for Indian journalism was nothing more than a node. It was just a step in the steady growth of capitalism in India. Now, by this I do not mean that everything that was happening was not good and worthy journalism, or that one could not make a contribution to the democratic process as a journalist, but it was part of a certain trajectory of control that I did not then understand. So let us look at the key developments in the country and in the media from this perspective. In the early 1980s, Indira Gandhi and Pranab Mukherjee, in response to the oil shock in the late 1970s, begin to cautiously open up the Indian economy. Rajiv Gandhi takes the process further, not just in his policies, but also in his persona, in his style, in his accessories, in his manner. He kind of looks forward to, he kind of embodies a certain shift in social and moral attitudes to consumption. Then in 1991, of course, we had the formal announcement of the new economic policy. And soon then, we have a steady progression towards capitalism, and now, under Narendra Modi, policies of hypercapitalism. In the media, meanwhile, 2 features were strikingly clear. One was size. The 1980s were the starting point of a massive, unprecedented expansion of the Indian media. Let me quote some figures from the National Readership Survey. In 1983-84, the number of adult readers of newspapers was 48 million. By 1990, that number had grown to 63 million, or 44% of the urban population. In 2002, the figure is 179 million. In 2005, 200 million. And today, India has 281.7 million newspaper readers. So you can just see the huge jump. The early 1980s also saw a big push for television. Transmission went from black and white to color, and the creation of infrastructure expanded television's reach to 75% of the country's landmass. 5 TV sets were sold a minute in 1988 is one estimate. Don't know how accurate it is, but it kind of gives you an idea of the kind of excitement over the spread of television. By 2005, television had reached 108 million Indian homes. 61 million of these had access to cable and satellite television. Today, there are approximately 140 million cable and satellite homes. So, at a very moderate 5 per home, this covers, I think, about 65% of the population. My math is not great on this, but I think what I am trying to kind of point out is that this particular period, the expansion of the media went hand in hand with certain economic policies. Now, the expansion of the media was also driven by advertising, which is another very important factor. The Indian advertising industry grew 25 times between 1976 and 1994, from rupees 1,160 million to rupees 30 billion. Okay, the impact on the media, as you can imagine, was tremendous. Previously, in the earlier period, the genteel print era of late 19th and early 20th century, the motivations for publishing newspapers were mixed. There were quite a variety. People published they brought out publications to sort of convey gossip, to sell products, to propagate messages of social reform, religion, to support the freedom movement, the whole kind of mixed bag. Television too was introduced with a mandate to propagate the state's developmental programs in literacy and agriculture. And newspapers tended to support the government, more or less. By the 1980s, instead of the reader, the media was chasing the advertiser. This is a huge shift and really very significant one. All the major changes that one saw in the 1980s, this was whether it was the rise of auditing exercises such as the National Readership Survey, which was sort of came about to produce reliable circulation figures for the advertiser. The use of technology, such as advances in printing and communication technology, which were quickly adopted by publications. Again, they enabled speed and simultaneity, which is again what the advertiser wanted. The proliferation of regional media, of language editions, were all driven by the commercial imperative. And the upshot of all this is to say that the opening up that I saw as a novice journalist in 1983 was illusory. Or maybe it was a kind of accidental surge that accompanies an expansion. But the fact was that it was not meant to last. In just a few years, the media that had seemed so free and strong and powerful to me in terms of its ability to challenge those in authority, to speak up for the vulnerable and so on, had become restricted and a toy in the hands of media owners. Several magazines were shut down for commercial considerations. Editors were asked to leave. The celebrated exit of Vinod Mehta was probably the most celebrated incident of that kind. You had newspapers beginning to twist editorial and dumbing down to bring in advertisements. This was a time when the idea that news was just another business took hold. It was pioneered by the Times of India's publisher Sameer Jain, but it soon became a credo of the press as a whole. I mean, very quickly. When the idea was first brought up, the rest of the kind of print media was horrified. They talked about the press being the fourth estate. It had to protect democracy. But very quickly, these ideals sort of crumbled. I mean, there are numerous stories about, and I'm going to kind of tell you one just because it kind of gives you an idea of the attitude. So this is a story in the Times of India office, which said apparently that Sameer Jain walked into the office and said, "Why does the editorial room have walls for cabins? Bring them down." I have heard from colleagues that this is true, but I think the point I want to make is that the idea was that the journalist, the editor, the person who discriminated, which is really the soul of journalism, you discriminate what to write about, you discriminate how much to write about, you discriminate how to write about, you discriminate what to put in your issue or not to put in, when to put it in. All these are critical functions of journalism. And there was a force beginning in the late 80s onwards to kind of crush that particular part of the media business. P. Sainath, who writes extensively and extremely critically and well about the media, did a count at one point and found that several Times of India editions were running without an editor or were headed by a marketing professional. But I have to say that this is something that has now come across the board, so we cannot really hold the Times of India now alone guilty of this. In 1990, in fact, I looked around at the publications to which I could apply for a job, and I realized that every single one of them appeared to kind of require employees to succumb to two kinds of pressure. One was a kind of commercial compromise for advertisements, and the other was pushing the political ideology of the day, which at that time was the Hindutva ideology. Now, neither of these choices, people do push, I mean, papers are run by ideological to push certain ideologies, and there is a history to that. But I'm saying that none of these are really favorable to independent and free journalism. Now, I have described my personal experience here only to demonstrate, as I said, that this was illusory, this opening up and then the closing up. How quickly that vanished, that moment. And I bring this up because over successive decades since then, since 1983, we have seen several points of the sort of so-called flowering I can think of several, the launch of new features magazines recently, the launch of independent news, the first independent news channel, and then the explosion of TV news channels. All of them kind of keep bringing this hope that we're now going to have good journalism that will actually kind of take the country, will talk to authority, will help the vulnerable, and every time it closes up. Now, I know that many of my colleagues will think this is a really bleak view, and they will kind of suggest that there are many stories that have done wonders. I mean, several stories occurred to me too, and several episodes we would not think of them. Let's take the violence in 2002 in Gujarat. I think that had it not been covered by journalists, we would not know what happened there. The Delhi rape case, for instance, again was sort of built up by the media and created the outrage that it did. So I'm not saying that the media does not sometimes produce good stories or that journalism is not important. I think the point I'm trying to make is that that perspective will not help us to understand politics today. I think if we need to understand politics today, then we need to see the kind of larger structural forces that have been shaping the media over the last 2 decades. And which is why I'm kind of pushing this aside and only talking about the structural forces that are reshaping the media. So let me now kind of describe some of these forces and how they link up to the politics of the present. If I may, I'm going to treat 2 of our leading contemporary politicians as axes to just as a convenient way to develop my argument. So I'm going to talk about Arvind Kejriwal and Narendra Modi. I'm going to use them, as I said, as axes. And I'm going to try and demonstrate how the evolution of the mass media over the last 3 decades contributed to the making of these 2 apparently very different leaders and their myths. Okay, I'm going to start with the features that light the way to the Aam Aadmi Party's Kejriwal first, and then I'll go on to Narendra Modi. The first set of features, one is homogenization. Big media absorbs and homogenizes. The world over, we have seen the rise of big media conglomerates. And in India too, the availability of advertising might seem to kind of offer the possibility of sustaining a large number of publications. But eventually, the small tend to be swallowed up by the large. Further, all sorts of alliances, takeovers, and marketing deals happen even between arch rivals. I forget now but I think that several newspapers who you would think are rivals in each market actually will tie up because it makes sense in terms of advertising possibilities and marketing. So the point is that instead of having many, you kind of have a coming together, similar motivations. So to give you an example, the Audit Bureau of Circulation listed 10 newspapers in Kerala in 1960, which is before the big boom that I've just talked about. Circulation increased by 8 times by the early 21st century, and yet only 4 papers in the early 21st century were eligible for the Audit Bureau of Circulation, which means that even though circulation had exponentially increased, even though the number of papers had increased, the papers which could actually get audited and could get commercial revenue were only 4. So anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that, again, homogenization, despite this sort of apparent growth. The growth of regional media too, while it seems to promise greater localization, eventually it sort of does not work out that way, because newspapers in capitalism need the state for patronage and protection. They need secure distribution, they need power supply, and they need national advertising. So regional newspapers again tend to translate the national. Some of the things that happened in these last few decades was that the media embraced technological upgradation, standardization of language, and popularization of certain styles of writing. I don't know how it was with the Marathi press, but for instance, the Gujarati press, the biggest publisher in Ahmedabad very proudly told me that how they've changed the language. They now got this sort of hybrid of some English words and very modern, he told me. I'm not criticizing it, but what I'm trying to say is that all these developments were driven by the need to answer the advertiser, the need to do many things that would please and bring in more advertising, please the advertiser and bring in more advertising. Another thing, another kind of trend that has been extremely big at this point is the launch of city supplements, which I think comes into your urban, the theme of your conference. And you have had city supplements, almost now I think most newspapers have city supplements. And yet, I will argue that if you look at all the city supplements, while they might have local news and local concerns, you almost seeing a kind of Chandigarh as a version of, it's not how Chandigarh is different, or you do not look at the Chandigarh edition, the section, the city section, and say, oh, this is Chandigarh and this is Pune. You're actually seeing how cosmopolitan are they, or how metropolitan are they. There are certain activities that are highlighted. Ahmedabad, which is a city I've been writing about, it was till some years ago, it was an extremely provincial city. It was very, people had sort of local delights, local foods, local pastimes. And now after there's sort of the Times of India has its metro edition, the Indian Express has its metro edition, all the newspapers have started their metro editions. And they're talking about dog shows, they're talking about golfing, they're talking about all sorts of activities, which I'm not saying that they don't exist, but my point is that each city supplement now seems to kind of be a measure of how metropolitan, that definition of metropolitan, that city is, and not actually showcasing that particular difference that each city has. So the point here is that the unprecedented and massive expansion of the media post the 1980s was actually accompanied by a homogeneity and straitjacketing of the media. Now, what was it that was being written about? As the role of advertising increased, the role of the publication also changed to being a showcase for products and a lifestyle of consumption. The discourse that emerged drew on the English-speaking urban professional segments of the middle classes who were benefiting from new employment opportunities and rising salaries in private sector companies. Again, I am talking about the English language media and the mainstream media. I'm not that familiar with the vernacular media, but I do feel from my observations that the vernacular media has been following in step, has been kind of reproducing many of these concerns and priorities. The image of the liberalizing middle class has been sort of created by advertising and media images, but these images have also contributed to the creation of an image of a liberalizing middle class as a social group that has transcended older concerns of inequity, poverty, and social justice. There is a kind of mood of celebration. Politics or the politics of the poor tend to get kind of marginalized or sidelined, or at least not highlighted in the way they might have been earlier. Now, the ramifications of this particular development are several. One is the rise of a new individualism that substituted for an older sense of community. It replaced a responsibility to society with a responsibility to oneself and one's immediate family. Further, it gave rise to a process of exclusion that the scholar Leela Fernandez calls the politics of forgetting. What she says is that a political discursive process in which dominant social groups and political actors attempt to naturalize these processes of exclusion by producing a middle-class-based definition of citizenship. One example in the way this sort of has manifested itself can be seen in the fight for space in Mumbai, which is the most hotly contested commodity in the city. In 1978, I think it was, I remember when the Maharashtra government tried to demolish slums in the pouring rain. The press went to town, creating a feeling of revulsion against the state and creating a sympathy for the slum dwellers, who saw their homes smashed, forced out into the pouring rain with their children. Middle-class lawyers rushed to find writ petitions, stopping the action. And though there were many in the city who felt that the slums were an eyesore, this was by no means a view that prevailed. Now, today, it's a very different matter. Slums are cleared as a matter of course, and one does not find the same concern amongst the privileged. Indeed, the discourse in the media is geared to represent the socio-economically challenged classes or any protest by them as a threat to the civic culture of the middle classes. Headlines, for instance, to give you a few, like Mumbaiites are held to ransom, or strikes, we've had enough. It is a narrative that presents an example of the transformation of the middle classes into the figure of the Indian consumer citizen, the new common man. Now, arguably, the old common man was also middle class, so how is it very different? I think that if you look at the Lakshman's cartoon of the common man, and you see the harried man, he's always bent, he sort of looks very miserable and sad, and I think a very clear thing that has changed is that the middle class man today is an angry man. Now, why is he angry? I think he's been angry for some time. And again, I would relate it to media and trends in the media, but of course, do keep in mind that while I'm highlighting the media, it does act in tandem with other forces, and so I might seem to be highlighting the role of the media a little more, and bear with me when I do that. Maybe some of you remember this sort of serial called Rajani, which was around, I think, in the late 1970s, or maybe early 80s. It had Priya Tendulkar, this sort of actress, as the angry young woman almost. She would go around, something was always happening. She would be going to the market and maybe a taxi driver would overcharge her, or she would be trying to buy vegetables and the vegetable vendor would overcharge her. Things like that kept happening. Or there was some element of corruption. Maybe the telephone man came to fix the telephone and asked for money. And she would always solve the problem. She would take him or her to task and solve the problem. So that was, I think, the beginning of that kind of anger seen in the media. I would like to, Thomas Blom-Hansen, another scholar who follows the middle class in India, claims that from the 60s onwards, I mean, he attributes this anger to a kind of plebeianization of the political field. What he means is, of course, the middle class, pre-independence, played a very major role in the freedom movement. Leaders for free India came from the middle class. Even post-independence, it was the middle class that seemed to kind of build the free nation. But as democracy took root, you had the rural masses seen as more illiterate, not so sophisticated, were choosing the leaders. And the middle class started beginning to sort of feel that as if their concerns were not being taken care of, that it was the concerns of the unwashed masses, to use a very rude way of putting it, were deciding what happened in the country. And this is what Blom-Hansen calls the plebeianization of the political field. What he says is that from the 1960s onwards, the public construction of politics has increasingly been transformed towards that of an immoral vocation, a site of unprincipled pragmatism, corruption, nepotism, and greed. In brief, as the profane antithesis to the sublime qualities of the cultural realm. This transformation reflects the changes in social backgrounds and cultural habitus of elected representatives and party activists. Middle-class politicians have increasingly been replaced by those drawn from peasant communities and lower caste groups, and their style, language, and social practices are decidedly more rustic and plebeian than those of the preceding generation. Now, this anger has just grown and grown and grown over the years. And I would suggest it's a completely untested hypothesis, but I would like to think that we have also been these last 3 decades are times when advertising, with its whole rhetoric of we want, we must have, has also kind of fueled perhaps this idea that what we want, we must have, and if we are denied it, then, you know, we can get angry. Again, as I said, this is an untested personal hypothesis. But anger is definitely kind of, there's simmering anger. Leela Fernandez went around interviewing people for her study on the middle classes, and she describes how her interaction with members of a staff of a magazine, that journalist that she was interviewing, and they told her, anger, the major feeling is anger. You can call one chapter anger. The middle classes are 2% of the population, and they are not being represented. There is no representation. The interests of the, another staff member added, politicians may be from middle class backgrounds, but middle class interests don't shape the policies and agendas. So Fernandez reaches the conclusion that it is this middle class anger and the corresponding question of the representation of middle class interests that lie at the foundation of the emerging consumer citizen in liberalizing India. And I would claim that this is the mood that contributed to the crowds that supported Anna Hazare and later Arvind Kejriwal. This is the kind of build-up to, so this is one axis, as I was telling you, of contemporary politics. Another aspect that has been written about so much that I don't want to kind of belabor it is, of course, the media's contribution to building up the Hindutva, the kind of mood for a unity amongst Hindus through serials like the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. So much has been written about it that I don't want to get into that whole kind of trajectory. But the point I want to make is that the point that has usually been made is that the showing of these serials on television created a certain unificatory kind of appeal, and which was used by parties like the BJP, particularly the whole Rath Yatra, to cash in on this mood and this sort of reverence for Ram, which also contributed to the Ayodhya movement. As I said, this has been talked about, so I don't want to talk about that, but what I want to point out is how this sort of unifying and homogenizing force then again feeds into and plays along with the consumerist drive, because markets, sellers of products also need homogeneous markets so that the symbols they use can appeal across the board. They need that kind of common ground. And so the media and Hindutva, I would kind of like to think of in this context as a kind of aid to marketing. I'm just going to quote from Arvind Rajgopal, who's written on this, the Ramayana, a great deal. And it sheds, again, it sort of goes sort of to prove what I'm trying to say. He says the new prominence of the media itself, which as facilitator rather than unmoved mover, enabled a new order of social connectivity in a visual regime that now extended across the nation. Ordinary citizens now perceive their actions as having implications for society at large, suggesting a new dimension to their perception and a different quality to the power they wielded. Such widespread changes invested claims by the BJP and its affiliates about the rebirth of a Hindu public with an ominous force. If you were to replace some of these words, Hindu public, etc., with the marketer, I'm trying to suggest that there is a certain homogenizing drive that works equally well for the market. Okay, now I would come to Narendra Modi and use him as the axis. Try to kind of talk about some of the features of the media in these last few decades that have enabled or perhaps contributed to the building of him as a politician and his myth. So I might seem to kind of depart completely from the subject, but bear with me. Okay, among the features that developed as a result of the kind of massive expansion and commercialization of the media starting in the 80s was this idea that information and entertainment both constitute the media. I mean, earlier if you thought about the press, you didn't really talk about television that much because it was a state monopolized medium. But when you talked about freeing the press, you talked about also wanting, you talked about news, and there was a distinction between news and entertainment. Now that was kind of being collapsed. So now if you talk, when you hear about the media, they will always put it all together. It will be television, print, music, film, gaming, all these things will be brought together under one umbrella. And I will not get into it right now, but it'll make sense as I go along. Another feature is an accent on glamour. This might have seemed accidental. This sort of the sudden kind of surge of stories on beauty, on the fashion industry, a great deal of space devoted to film news. I mean, I'm sure that if you've seen the kind of press before, let's say around 1985 or even 1990, perhaps even, let's say 1990, I think, you might have seen a column on a Sunday with some film gossip in the daily newspaper. And then if you wanted to, you bought your magazines, your film magazines if you wanted more. But film entered in a very, very big way into the mainstream press and became news. A new shoot or an actress arriving to cut a ribbon somewhere was sort of considered big news. Okay, keep this in mind. I mean, then the whole beauty business, the kind of Miss World, etc. But I'm not so interested in talking about how the beauty business was being sold. I just want to kind of focus on how glamour was brought into our lives in such a big way. Those who are not journalists might not kind of be aware of certain other things that were happening in the media. So I'll give you an example. For instance, there's a tabloid in Mumbai which at one sort of fell swoop just sacked people who are older beyond a certain age, stopped even columns by people who were elderly. So you had a sort of youthfulness being demanded in a newspaper. You had a memo that was sent out in one newspaper where they said only happy news on the front page, positive news. So you see the news anchors, they're all young, they're attractive. So just keep in mind again, that's another thing, glamour, the glamorization, sort of bringing in of glamour in this big way into the media. Another feature was celebrities. By this, I'm not talking about the page 3 kind of stuff. What I'm talking about is the idea that increasingly took hold of the media, that you have to build every story around a person, around an individual. Now, it's actually, by many editors, thoughtlessly, I mean, it was seen as good journalism. No, it's a good way to write a story. Many of these things were not done with, perhaps not as part of a conspiracy. They're probably done at different levels where people who thought what they were doing was improving the media. Another feature, of course, is product placement. I mean, the best way I can give you an example of it is to go into cinema, where now it's become very common to have products being placed. So you have the hero might be drinking a soft drink, and the soft drink manufacturer will have paid to put that particular soft drink in his hand. And this is a common kind of thing that's happening in the movies. But you can say, as a lot of people do, they talk about it as an advertising innovation, a marketing innovation. But what it does do is actually sort of impact on your freedom as a writer, or you might not want your hero to be drinking a soft drink, but you will have him drinking it because you can make extra money out of that. All these are things that have been just happening around us. without much acknowledgement. And so I want to build it all up into an argument. Okay, another feature was lifestyle. Of course, the sort of celebratory lifestyles that you see covered in the press so much is very much associated with the idea of the reader as a consumer. I mean, the idea of happiness and celebration is very much tied in with the commercial imperative, because advertisers believe the products sell when you have an environment that is, happy. So, for instance, I was editing a women's magazine at one point, and I knew that you cannot carry, let's say, it was not that I could write about women's serious health issues. That was not happy. I could write about breast cancer. I mean, or, maybe a campaign, because there were some actresses who were supporting it. So it was given a positive spin. It will be talked about as a survivor. But you will not actually talk about serious issues confronting women. That was not. So all these have been creeping up on us, these kind of new media mantras. Okay, another huge kind of media, sort of medium, of course, is television. The explosion of news television. Now, when CNN launched 24/7 news television, I don't know if you remember, but that was the time of the Gulf War, where they showed you kind of images of, they just covered the Gulf War. And then India kind of sort of started its own news channels and also had 24/7 news television. Now, it's happened so fast, and it's happened without any question that we don't actually question this. But just think back on a time when you had just Doordarshan, and you had what? One news segment, or maybe two, depending on, you had English news and then maybe Marathi news or Hindi news or whatever. Now, from that to go to 24/7 news, what does it mean? I mean, think of the kind of expansion of space. You can look at it in a positive way. I mean, first of all, okay, so that means that you are hooked on to, I mean, there's something always there, something that you can always put on and will always be telling you something that's happening in the world. So one, as I said, it's there always, on tap. Second, with all this space, maybe you could have done a lot of good things with it. Let's say you could have done, great documentaries, investigated issues, had journalists fan out into the rural areas, and you could have looked at water problems, you could have looked at environmental problems, you could have talked all day about the economy, or talked all day about politics. You could have given a historical background, you could have done all kinds of things. We all know that that's not what happens in our television channels. The format that they have used is of two kinds of formats. One is just to put a camera. You see, it's not, the journalist is almost not present or there to ask very inane and silly questions like, the standard joke, aapko kaisa lagta hai, whenever any disaster happens. But it's just a camera, and it's just, there's no filter, nothing telling you, nothing, it's just a piece of glass between you and an event. So again, keep that in mind. This is a surface view of what is happening, not a 3D view, not a journalist going in and finding something out, shaping it and giving it to you. You can say this is good, this is allowing us to be there. Is it really telling you the truth? Because what it is doing is also framing it for you. It's framing it in a certain way, but then it just leaves it there, and giving you the illusion that you are there, but you're not really. But anyways, as I said, there is a surface, no depth. And then there is this format of debates, right? This television studio debates. Every evening, the fight between the ruling party and the others. Now, what does it do? First of all, when you have an opposition party put on the same kind of level as the party in power, what it actually does is it puts the party in power at a disadvantage and gives the opposition parties a certain significance which was not gained by politics. It's the media that's giving it. I mean, if they had gotten it through politics, they would be in power. But here they are on every evening. We're seeing them debate issues on the same kind of level, both on the same level. That's one. So what it does is that it treats everything. Oh, the other thing it does is every issue is an opinion. So it kind of creates a certain amoral environment in which everything, is this a phone? Maybe yes, maybe no. But is this, can you hear me? Yes, no. Everything is yes, no. Did violence take place in Gujarat? It's an opinion. Yes, no. Or maybe look at 1984, look at that. Everything is an opinion and everything is in opposition. So the journalist is only there to, like a person in a boxing ring, to orchestrate this game, but is as if incapable or helpless to discover the truth. Now, how does this contrast with an older style of doing journalism? Let's say a mass murder takes place somewhere. What would a journalist do? A journalist would go there, investigate it, get the numbers, go to the hospitals, find out, and there are certain objective ways of verifying a situation, which is what good journalism does. It authenticates, it verifies, it does all that, and then it will produce a story. 20 people died and etc., this accident, and this happened. Now, I'm not saying that they will always discover the whole truth, but as far as they can, as far as a person is good at his work, will discover some sort of truth. Now, what happens here? What happens when every evening, every single issue is turned into something that is the matter of an opinion and a matter of both opinions? What you come to start feeling is that everything, there is no truth, there is no objective truth. Everything is maybe, and everything has an other side. Yes, certainly everything has another side, but there is something that is an independent truth. As far as we have known it, we have agreed to call this pink, then it is pink. And yes, there can be many artistic debates on that. But, so there has been a certain kind of atmosphere of amorality that has come about. And the other point I want to make is that I think a lot of bad journalism is sort of, television is sort of showcasing a lot of bad journalism, or is actually showcasing the absence of journalism, because they're not going out with all this space, this 24/7 space, with all the resources, with all the entry into your homes. They are not going out and investigating anything. Everything is just thrown at you. Now, I want to use a particular example of the Gujarat model that was used again and again and again and again by anchors, news anchors. And it was treated as something that is sort of imaginary. I mean, it was not treated as something that you could actually go and check up on, or something that you could investigate. Not something that you took a camera with and asked people about. Not, again, the same opinion business, because people will say yes and no, and you will showcase both. But find out. A lot was appeared in the print media, but again, I want to make the point that this whole business of opinions, and yes, I mean, that it can be this or that, and everything is a confrontation, and everything is a kind of, what it has done is turned everything into a kind of something to do with a particular party, or you are pro or anti. And you have heard this rhetoric before. You heard it when George Bush launched the Iraq invasion. You're with us or you're against us. It's the same kind of, and the American media, I mean, is the model, has been the model. Fox News has been the model for our TV shows, the debates. Okay, the other point, the last point I want to kind of touch on here is, there's been a mix-up of what is serious and what is frivolous and what is serious. So, for instance, cricket First of all, you have this sort of bombardment of cricket. You have so much cricket. And then it is taken very seriously. You have analysis, you have charts, you have graphs, you have... Why am I sort of bringing this up? I'm bringing this up because elections are treated the same way. So something that you would think is a game is being treated with the same seriousness and the same kind of space and with the same kind of models of opinions and analysts and experts, etc., as politics or the elections. So for instance, you see everything as some kind of contest and a game. Entertainment. So the point I made earlier about entertainment and information coming together, this is kind of what has happened. There's been a trivialization of what is serious. Now, all these factors, the glamour, the surface, the attention to surface, the trivialization, all these create an environment in which a certain kind of insertion of the political is possible. And I would argue that Narendra Modi has actually been the first Indian politician to understand how he can insert himself into this sort of environment. He is not the first politician to benefit from the visibility factor of the Indian media and the reach. I mean, I would like to kind of think back to Rajiv Gandhi in 1984. I don't know how many of you remember that before he became Prime Minister, he was seen as a kind of upstart. He was seen as his mother's son who had gotten ahead in politics very fast, unfairly. He was sort of seen to be associated with undemocratic moves such as, I think, removing NTR in Andhra Pradesh or sort of interfering in Kashmir. He was seen as a brash kind of upstart. And then in October 1984, Mrs. Gandhi, the day Mrs. Gandhi is shot, and he is suddenly just elevated to the prime ministership, and he comes on television. I don't know how many of you kind of remember that moment or saw it, but he calmed down the nation. I mean, it was instantly that sort of feeling of, okay, there's someone in charge. This was followed by the funeral of Mrs. Gandhi. And again, if you remember that these images were telecast, and I would compare that to the Varanasi sort of ceremony that Mr. Modi conducted recently, which again was televised. It had the same sort of emotive, sort of ritualistic, that kind of build-up. And the Mrs. Gandhi's funeral, Rajiv Gandhi, the grieving son, the wife, the children, the funeral pyre, it was all extremely powerful. And after that, Rajiv Gandhi went on a yatra, he went on a tour of the country. And again, this kind of guy who was seen as a brash upstart, who didn't deserve to be there, was suddenly, you know, kind of had a honeymoon with the press. And people said, oh, he's... Of course, these are very picturesque places. He went to Rajasthan, he went to Kerala, and it was all shot, beautiful color television, etc. It was seen as his sort of discovery of India. And the point I'm trying to make is that television was helped to create an aura around him. It helped to create a certain goodwill. Of course, I'm not saying there were not other factors, the fact that he won the stupendous majority, the fact that his mother had been, you know, assassinated. Of course, all of these matter, but I'm just trying to kind of draw your attention to how powerful the media was, and it was analyzed at that point. It was analyzed quite thoroughly. Now to come back to 2014, where we have had much more media. We've had free media, we've become used to media in our lives. You might not even know that you're doing this. I think in 2005 they found that people were spending like approximately 23 hours on the media a week. I'm sure the sort of number is higher. Media is just all around us, it's all pervasive. And as I have pointed out, this is not media that is just, that's sort of free media. It's media that has a commercial aim, that is interested in selling products, in getting more advertising. So, how did Narendra Modi now kind of, I would argue that he positioned himself in a few ways. Okay, one was that He was the product. He was the model. He was the message. He was everything. He combined it all in him. A lot of people sort of said that, you look at his speeches, he just sort of says these one-liners and he just sort of says these simple things and all the time. What is he going to do if I'm talking about before he became Prime Minister. What is he going to do? What is his policy all about? What is the Gujarat model all about? Look at the simple, he used to just talk about the Gujarat model. Now, how does this work? Okay, another argument often put forward is that, yes, of course he was covered by the press, but it was all negative. Everything was sort of talking about him in 2002 and how he was involved or not involved, etc. So he had a bad name. So how can you say the media actually helped him? Now, I would argue that what 2002 did, and I think 2002, the repeated talking about 2002, and I think that it was also India's first, what they call India's first televised episode of violence. Before that, we did not see communal violence. We just didn't see it, We read about it in the newspapers. Newspapers talked about one community and another community. They didn't name communities. And now you actually had something that you could not escape. It was as I said, it's on tap and you're kind of hooked and you're watching it all the time. And so 2002, there was a certain degree of fetishization. There was a certain degree of repetition that was like a mantra, which you can say, you think it would work against a politician if you're saying that he is responsible for that. But it also made him a familiar story. It made him a familiar presence. How many chief ministers do you know are you familiar with? You might have heard of Jayalalitha. Does she occupy your mind much? You don't think about her. There are chief ministers all over the country. But Narendra Modi was sort of in your mind all the time because 2002 was upfront news. And what he did was he's replaced that with a very simple, equally simple other shorthand, Gujarat model development. And these sort of simple words, simple messages are what advertisers use. What do advertisers use? Thumbs up, the taste of, freedom, or it's happiness is this, or good days are here again, or I'm thinking of very old ads for some reason. Nothing new is coming to mind, but you know what I mean, that it's these simple messages that's what a marketer does. They blitz you with images, they blitz you with the kind of bottle, they blitz you, their sort of subliminal advertising. You cannot think of anything else. To the point that if you're thirsty, hungry kya, eat a pizza, that kind of. So he understood that this is a new generation, this is a new era, this is a new time. And he is the first, I think, the Indian politician to actually understand it. And that is why I think his rise was so rapid and so fast that something seemed to be not like kind of puzzling, bewildering. Even within his own party. How many parties have you seen where someone can just rise up the ranks, throwing aside senior leaders, etc.? He made it seem inevitable. Now this works in tandem with the kind of huge media blitz that we have seen. There are people talking about 5,000 crore publicity campaign. It is true that his face was everywhere. His face was on every little pen, anything you could buy. There were little, just like now they do with movies. A new Shah Rukh Khan film comes out, you can buy a little doll, you can buy all kinds of things. So he has been using the media in the way that an advertiser uses it to sell a product. He positioned himself as an object of mass consumption, not just as a leader, not just as a politician. And I think that is the kind of, perhaps the kind of puzzling thing that has happened, because people don't expect that in politics. To give you a simple example, you look at his photographs. They're not just, politicians, yes, you see them everywhere, you see them, and they don't particularly pay attention to what they're wearing or how they're looking. Or Narendra Modi is very different. You see all his political campaigning, you see him, he's always dressed, sort of color coordinated, all of this matters. Well, anyway, so now that he has been elected, clearly that kind of strategy works, and this is a strategy that we need to kind of now think about, because there is a great degree of manipulation in this, but not necessarily just by the politician who uses it. There is manipulation that the groundwork has been already laid. And so we need to kind of be more alert to what is going on around us. We can't just watch media without being informed about what it's doing to us or being concerned. To me, it's like a very dangerous thing. You know, if I was to say, let's give your children drugs, you know, let's just put them on, or let's put them on alcohol, and I'm sure there'd be a widespread protest. But at the same time, we think nothing of just allowing them television, allowing them this sort of commercial manipulation that the media does these days. But I want to just talk about, coming to the end of my talk, what I want to wrap up with is the future, or at least the present, in a certain, another very worrying trend, is that much of the media now is in corporate hands. I mean, corporate hands I mean, it has always been, there's always been a business interest in the media. Media owners were not always, I mean, many of them were owners of businesses. But today there is a kind of takeover, and it is not new. It has been happening for a long time now. I mean, at least I think it was about 15 years ago that someone like a Vijay Mallya could say, I'm starting a TV channel because I want to use it. I need the political pull. Jayalalitha had her own channel. I mean, politicians have been starting newspapers, political parties have newspapers, they have TV channels, all that is happening. But I think that today there is very little free space left in the media world, extremely little. And I don't quite know what's going to happen now. I mean, as I see it, the media is an entity that citizens and journalists think is for them. But it is now equally true that there are corporate entities, business houses, political entities who think that the media is for them, to serve them. And whether right or wrong, as long as we keep thinking that it's for us, we are prone to being manipulated. I'm saying that we need to now realize that it is not acting on our behalf necessarily. And what can we do perhaps to change that? Or what can we do perhaps to sort of, if not counter, at least build up a resistance to that? Is a question that it would be great if all of us could think about. Thank you.
Clearly borne out by the fact that all of this, whatever she said, is something that most of us won't have any issues with, and at least I don't know as to how would you go about countering or rebutting whatever has been said. You might quibble about petty details here and there, but the larger framework of whatever has been put in front of you, one doesn't know as to how does one get across to it and say no to it, like, no, this is something that's profoundly wrong. When this election result came in, there were a couple of things which were very interesting. It was a clearly media manufactured election. It was something that was made for us. हमारे लिए बनाया गया था. और हमारा काम बस इतना था कि like we had to go on that respective day on which we were supposed to go in and vote, and that voting was pointless because we were told that whichever way you vote or whatever you do, the result has already been decided. The Republic of India has decided that he's going to be the man, and that's the way in which he campaigned in all the subsequent stages. मतलब एक staggered 9-stage election in which in every subsequent stage he was like campaigning, you all are done off with. आपका कोई काम नहीं है, आप कुछ भी नहीं करने वाले हो, आप कुछ भी करो, I'm getting through. Where does that sort of confidence stem up from? So that sort of confidence stems up from the fact that the advertiser knows fully well, कुछ भी हो, product तो भाई बेचा ही जाएगा. Slightly कम ज़्यादा हो जाएगा, पर product बेचा तो definitely जाएगा. But that, as far as, you know, we have this constitutional mandate which says that each one of us has to be minimum 18 years of age before we go in and vote. And that's seen as like we are adults, we are supposed to be adults. We are supposed to be adults who can decide as to what should be done as far as this republic is concerned. And here was a man who was strutting around for 4 months telling us in no uncertain terms कुछ भी नहीं होने वाला है, आप कुछ भी करो, he is true. And how does that work? Well, that's a process that she has laid out for you. That's the way in which it works. This is a way by which you sell toys on things like Cartoon Network to kids. ये वाला जो तरीका होता है ना कि जिससे आप क्या बेचते हो, आपको छोटे वाले जो ट्रिंकेट्स होते हैं ना, टॉयज, you promise kids meals at max so that at the end of the day they would get toys. The saddest part on that evening was they treated us as kids. They treated us almost as infants. They worked on our psyches, they worked on us as if we are nothing more than kids looking out for toys after a Mac dinner. Pata nahi, how do you feel about it? I feel deeply irritated. Like, I'm a kid trapped in the body of a man. But that was a sense, that was a disgusting sense it left me with. Like, no, huh? Yeah, obviously. That's exactly, I was just making a point after I said that we open up for all manner of questions, comments, everything.
So my question actually is about the alternative media.
Sorry?
The alternative media.
You know what? May I answer this just before I come to you? Because, and then I'll take, because it's asking a question that might talk about the alternative media. Okay, so I'm not going to read the whole question, but the question is, as how it propels a sort of biased, bipartisan view, isn't it not also the people, the viewers who are supporting this kind of reportage by the constant viewership? Does it mean that the average urban viewer is mostly satisfied with what they want to listen and turn a blind eye towards the nuances of a particular story? Would the good speakers, always prevail? I think the question is that do viewers want what they see? And it's a pretty good question, but I don't think it's actually a fair question because, my father came to visit me recently in Bangalore, and every morning, I don't get the newspaper in the mornings anymore, and he was so restless, and he wouldn't rest until he got a newspaper. And so, I don't think that he's become so habituated to a newspaper, as most of us are, right, in the mornings. So there is a slot in which it just slides. There is a slot in which the television news and the newspaper just slides. And so the viewer doesn't really get much of an opportunity. And he could get an opportunity to sort of turn it off, of course, and then he has to watch the other channel, which is the same, which is my point about homogeneity, because, the homogenization of the media. So you don't really have a choice within the media. And so what can you do? You could turn it off completely. That's a possibility, but I think that we need to talk more about. Sorry, your question.
No, this is very depressing, and we've been kind of living this experience of the media takeover of politics and the political takeover of media. But do you see any hope in the possibility of the other kinds of alternative medias which have, through the processes of capitalism and technology, but then, often things go against the desire of capital. And it has made available this kind of a media which, where people can report if they so want to. There are bloggers and there is critique that is, available about this whole system. So do you think that, can this build up into something? Do you see that there is any hope at all here?
Actually, I don't. The social media which all seems to promise. I know my prognosis is very depressing, but I've been through that optimism and excitement and seen how actually it closes up again immediately. So I don't really have much, or let me put it this way. I think when there is no consciousness, there is no hope. So then you can have any number of alternative media coming up. You can have radio, you can have, social media, you can have a phone message, you can have a plethora, and they will all be they will all be made to follow the corporate interest unless we can find, unless there is a consciousness, there's a conscious, you kind of break from the enchantment of the media and stop thinking that this is great, now there's a blossoming. And I've heard this from my colleagues constantly, oh, look now at the features magazines that have come up. And then you see them closing again. You see, so let's not live in a sort of fool's paradise. Let's assume that, no, it's not going to, the subversion is going to be there. But if we are conscious, then we can arrest the manipulation. We can't be manipulated if we are awake, in that sense. We can only be manipulated if we are blindly optimistic.
ये जो बात अभी आई थी, मैं थोड़ा भाषा की बदल से ही शुरुआत करता हूँ. ये विकल्प नहीं है और यही विकल्प है. There is no alternative and this is the alternative. ये हवा पैदा करने में, ये माहौल पैदा करने में, ये वो कामयाब हुए. अब सवाल ये है कि ये why did the whole mass of people got managed? और मीडिया में अन्ना हजारे की उस महाराष्ट्र में और कई वर्षों से हम लोग लगे हुए थे उसमें, जब से राइट ऑफ इंफॉर्मेशन, और दिल्ली में जब जंतर मंतर में पहला सब फेज हुआ, मैं इसलिए ये सवाल, ये संदर्भ दे रहा हूँ. तो ये हुआ कि मुझे बिल्कुल कुछ दिनों के बाद ये लग गया कि ये तो पूरी मीडिया सर्कस है, ये मैनेज है. और जो लोग आ रहे थे छुट्टी के समय वहाँ दो जंतर मंतर पर, और मैं बड़ा हर रोज़ वहाँ बैठा था. कई लोग अन्ना के पीछे बिठाने का मुझे काम भी दे दिया था, साथ में था इसलिए. तो ये है कि अन्ना का जो हुआ, अरविंद का जो हुआ, क्या मतलब मीडिया ने जो एक भूत सवार कर दिया है और मैन्युफैक्चर्ड और मीडिया क्रिएटेड है, उनका 10,000 करोड़ और अदानी अंबानी, ये सारे फैक्टर तो कुछ गिनाने की जरूरत नहीं है. अब सवाल ये है कि जब आप लोगों को, आई थिंक वन थिंग दैट हैज हैपेंड दैट वी हैव टर्न पीपल इनटू अ मास ऑब्जेक्ट. कंज्यूमर है या वोटर है, सिटीजन नहीं है. और आज सारा समाज को तोड़ दिया और 300 मिलियन पीपल, 200 मिलियन पीपल, हम सारे मिडिल क्लास, हम बाजार है, हम व्यक्ति नहीं है. और इस बाजार में जो माल बिक रहा है, तो क्या विकल्प की बात जो अन्ना के, मुझे लगा था कि ये चलेगा नहीं, और मैं उसी दिन मैंने मराठी अखबारों में लिख के कहा था और वहाँ भी कहा था, लोकसभा टेलीविज़न में हमारे परंजय गुहा ठाकुर था ने बड़ी इंटरव्यू लेकर, पहला आदमी था जिसने, तो मैं अपनी बात नहीं कह रहा हूँ, मुझे सेंस हो गया. मैंने कहा कि मुंबई में आप बिल्कुल इस देश में जेल में जाने के लिए अभी लोग नहीं है, आप ये हवा मत क्रिएट कीजिए. आंधी है, गांधी है, बाली, सब बकवास. तो अब ये भी बात कहीं होगी क्या? विकल्प नहीं है, देयर इज नो अल्टरनेटिव. मुझे लगता है गलत है, विकल्प है. अब अन्ना, आप और मोदी, ये सारे जो दायरे हैं इसको देखने में कि कुछ तो विश्लेषण, और आपने इतना अच्छा ब्यौरा रखा है, मैं एक ही मिनट लेता हूँ. दिस ओल ओवरव्यू कि ये तो एक कमाल है, ट्रिक्स प्ले की गई है और वो बहुत सक्सेसफुली, बहुत माहिर तरीके से प्ले की गई है. लेकिन 31% लोगों ने वोट दिया, 69 ने नहीं दिया. 20% वोट से मायावती को एक भी सीट नहीं आती है. और सारा जो खेल बाजार का सब खड़ा हुआ है, तो अब कसौटी है. क्या हम ये नहीं कह सकते, अब सवाल उनकी कसौटी का समय तो आ गया है कि भैया कल को आप अंबानी के तेल का दाम का क्या करोगे? बहुत सीधी बात है, उन्होंने कुछ नहीं कहा. और जिस पक्ष के, आई थिंक हम अगर सहारा ले सकते हैं, बिल्कुल एक बात कह रहा हूँ, मेरा कोई सवाल नहीं, लेकिन क्या आप इसको समझते हैं कि वास्तवता में आ सकता है कि फिर भारतीय संविधान का आधार लेकर हम कह सकते हैं कि जिस पार्टी और जिस सोच में तुम्हारी धर्मनिरपेक्षता, सेक्युलरिज्म और सोशलिज्म कहीं उनके मैनिफेस्टो में नहीं है. अब सोनिया गांधी परसों नेहरू के समय कह गई कि स्टॉन्च सेक्युलरिज्म एंड सोशलिस्ट इकोनॉमिक्स हमारे कोर वैल्यूज हैं. तो इससे देश में कुछ हम कुछ समय जाएगा, कल नहीं होगा ये, लेकिन मुझे लगता है कि विकल्प हो सकता है। और बहुत व्हाट डू यू फील एज ए मीडिया एनालिस्ट, इज इट अवर कि नहीं, हमको वी आर जस्ट सेइंग कि होप होनी चाहिए क्या, लेकिन सही क्या तरीके से हो सकती है? मैं लंबा बोल
नहीं, my answer was not pessimistic. I mean, okay, it is pessimistic about, it is not, the media is not going to, even alternative media is not going to come to our help. But we can, if we break that enchantment, then we will not be manipulated. Then we can use the media for us. But then we can find alternative spaces, or we can make, but as long as we expect it to happen on its own, it will not happen. Because there will always be a kind of takeover, always be a commercialization, or someone who will take it away for his own agenda. So. Murdochization. I think it is more than yeah, it is Murdochization. It is Murdochization because it is sensationalization, it is dumbing down. But I mean, it is like, you know, those countries have their own histories, and what I think is happening here is that all the media, by allowing itself to be trivialized, they are not allowing real debate. As he said, they are infantilizing us, and we are allowing ourselves to be infantilized.
Can I? My name is Anand. Now, good or bad, I worked as a marketing consultant to Sakal Papers for 10 years, which is one of the largest vernacular papers. I was instrumental in launching the first newspaper for farmers anywhere in the world, called Agro-One. I had the privilege also of working as a marketing consultant for Indian Express.
Okay.
I also worked as a marketing consultant for some of the largest advertisers, including Titan, Ultratech, so on and so
Okay.
forth. I don't want to join issues with you, but I want to bring in some additional information and a viewpoint which really supplements what you are saying. So give me 2 minutes.
Sure.
In your speech, you started with readership surveys. Now, the capitalist system sets up processes and institutions to serve their interests. It doesn't operate by individual whims and fancies. Let us take readership surveys and TV ratings. There has been a shift from National Readership Survey to Indian Readership Survey. NRS was being conducted by AC Nielsen in association with Audit Bureau of Circulation. Closed. Now you have only Indian Readership Survey run by Hausa Research. Critically, it is financed by Media Users Research Council. Now there is a big difference between a lot of newspapers financing a readership survey and a Media Users Research Council financing a readership survey. So now the readership survey is being financed by advertisers rather than by newspaper owners. What difference does it make? Now I don't have hard facts just now. Even when it was NRS survey, the sample was highly biased in favor of urban readers, and that too upper class readers. We remember that when we launched Agro-One, we said, how much rural readership you have? They said, will you pay for it? Then we will convey rural readers. Otherwise, our sample stays. So the whole sample is highly urban, and that too much more in favor of what they call ACC1, Socioeconomic Class A+. How you define AC Class A+, the definitions have changed over the last 20-25 years, progressively making it more and more elitist. And therefore, now, what editors are told and journalists are told is who reads your newspaper is what is critical. In a way, it is a very simple question. Maximize your readership, which is what strategically every marketing consultant will say, that you watch the top line, the bottom line would follow.
Yeah.
here the top line is also segmented. And you want top line from ACCA, which is a very small, urban, upper, super middle class, or I will call them rich, and which are under a lot of influence of what is known as NRI, non-resident Indians. These are really resident non-Indians in India. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, the point is, media must increase its readership amongst this class. Is a declared official objective. There is no secret about it. Okay. Now, if this we don't object, and if this target is to be followed, all the consequences will follow. In the sense, then you must print and you must show what a small elitist section wants to read and wants to see.
Yeah.
That is what is precisely happening.
Yeah.
You see, when we started saying we must look at readers' feedback, there was a class of editors who refused. In retrospect, I think they were right, because they knew perhaps what would follow. Is not all readers, but only a section of readers. So therefore, whether Mr. Jain said that the purpose of newspaper is carry an advertisement to a reader is incidental. As long as officially, this is the policy, proclaimed, followed, and which is a rule of a capitalist class and capitalist system, this is bound to happen. To what extent? It is not only advertisers. I don't remember the name of the institute. There is an institute in Madras, Chennai that is, which follows media exposure of various celebrities. And election time, they followed media exposure of political leaders. Leave aside all advertising. When it is a news channel, the coverage Narendra Modi got, according to them, was 4.5 times more than any other leader, including Gandhi family. And is not talking of 40% more. So they show what viewers want to watch. Then TRP rating goes up.
Right.
And that is what is required to bring in advertisers. So advertisers become an effect, not a cause. That is where I will like to supplement what Mr. Kunjil said. Good advertisement does not sell a byproduct. However you advertise.
Very true, yeah.
Okay, so whether Narendra Modi is a good product or a bad product, people still decide. That is where the hope is. That majority found him good, we may not like. I am not a supporter. But we must have openness to accept that a majority of Indian population found Narendra Modi good, irrespective of what advertisers said. Otherwise, a lot of bad products can sell. This is one story. I would also like to bring the historicity slightly backward. You started with your first
80s, yeah.
80s. But if you go back, then you will realize this presidential style of election was also there when Indira Gandhi fought
in the
elections
70s.
Purely against Indira Hatao or Garibi Hatao.
Yes.
And she was the single symbol.
Yes.
And people were able to say and claim that Indira is India.
Yes.
Okay. These small advertising slogans is a part of core advertising for last so many years.
True.
So will you say Mahatma Gandhi used advertising tactics when he used a small slogan like Chale Jao? And will you say Indira Gandhi used the advertising tactic when she used a very small attractive slogan like Garibi Hatao? So please realize, let us not give undue credit to capitalist system, advertisers. There is a lot of intrinsic value to having good political slogans. That Rajiv Gandhi had them bad and you moved a comma and whole meaning changed, like Yuva Josh. Nahi, kya? Kadi soch nahi Yuva Josh. All slogans like that, 10. You just move a comma and you say Yuva Josh nahi kadi soch, it will become ulta. Now, designed it bad. Correct? Thank you.
No, I thank you very much. I think many of the points you made are excellent, an excellent supplement also to what I was saying. And particularly the elitist, I think, segment, but you've got to, yes. But I do want to make a distinction between, and I agree with you, I think Indira Gandhi was an untested, untried politician, and with Garibi Hatao, she also, it's the same. Yeah. But I do think that there is a difference, and why the kind of, why this question about marketing and why I'm actually highlighting the marketing aspect of Narendra Modi's campaign is because he was associated for a very long time with something that was treated as repugnant by the media. And there has been a kind of shift that has been seen as something rather surprising. And if you look at politicians like George Bush, if you see the kind of marketing of Tony Blair, this is a newer age advertising. Yeah, I read it, Theodore, yes.
Which goes long back.
Long back, but no, but I don't think this is straightforward. I disagree with you. I don't think it is the same thing. And the reason why I'm saying it is because people have been puzzled why, for instance, George Bush, when he was re-elected, when there was a majority opinion the other way, how they have been showing, for instance, the towers. There's been sort of use of all these sort of formulae of repetition, etc., to get a certain result, which I think goes beyond. There's an element of manipulation that goes well beyond the kind of simpler era of political marketing then.
I think it's quite late, but I will ask a very simple question. The process which you've been describing during your very enlightening lecture, if you try to understand the holistic or the bigger picture, it is not so linear. Basically, I'm trying to say the whole process is very complex. It is basically a flux. It is not so linear. So, in itself, if you try to analyze the role of media during the last 8 months, autonomously or arbitrarily, everything you said is absolutely fine and right. There is absolutely no argument about it. But if you look at the bigger picture, what I feel, it's not the way media has played its role, but the ownership of the media was more critical in making the decisions in the boardrooms. They already there was no level playing field. It is not only the media per se, I mean the editors or the anchors or the writers or the analyzers. It's basically the decision was taken by the media houses and by the owners because they have already identified their interest with Modi or BJP. So if you understand what has exactly happened during the last couple of years, I remember in 2012 in October, I was to give a lecture and I was basically talking about what happened in Delhi during Anna's agitation. My title of the subject was Anna's War is Media's Game. Now it has transcended much beyond when media covered Anna, when media covered Arvind Kejriwal, and when media covered Modi during the last 8 months or so. The picture probably is very, very complex. There were so many factors at play. I mean, the complexity of the picture has to be taken into account when you describe what is the outcome or what is the product that is being delivered during the last 8 months campaign. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, there are lots of complexities that one is kind of sort of not looking at and not bringing in. But I think that the point I wanted to make is a certain kind of environment within which this election has taken place. And I don't think that is acknowledged enough.
You had brought up the question about opposition parties getting equal airtime versus the government in power.
Right.
So, given post-Modi, given the new government,
yes,
will the now former ruling parties get equal airtime given the fact that BJP has got such enormous support from the media outlets?
Right. I don't know, because now there seems to be a kind of corporate takeover of the media. So I don't know how it's going to pan out. It won't if he's directing. I agree with you in the sense that if you say the good product can sell. I mean, I'm not saying, I don't think everything that I say has to be treated as a a kind of, there is a certain analytical component, and but Narendra Modi has been known to kind of use the media to, and he is also known now to have, I mean, I know as a journalist, I know that right now, I don't know where I could write easily. Who will carry me freely? Which is a very frightening state of affairs, and it's happened very swiftly. And that is, there's a buzz. There's actually a buzz of people kind of saying, I know publishing houses which are turning away books that, so what are you telling me? Are you saying that there is no pressure? Even if it's suggested pressure, why is it? I know because I've been studying Gujarat before. So I know that there is a record of a certain lack of, a kind of a authoritarian rule over there. So the fear exists, and so I'm not sure that it will now work that way. It will be not allowed to, I suppose.
Thank you.